Yeah, again, a chapter on basics of business administration. Now, today, uh, yeah, now, human resources, that is, personnel questions, or to express it more modern, questions concerning your staff. Now, I'm not an expert in human relations and human resources. Probably you can imagine that my my focus is on taxation, accounting, all these stuff. So human resources, that's probably there you probably asked the wrong expert, but at least I can give you some basic ideas of what it's all about. Naturally, when you employ people to work for your enterprise, you will have to motivate them. Perhaps at least you are interested in that they work properly. And so one will have to think about what is the decisive determinators for their performance. So when will workers be good and when will they be bad? Well, it first depends on their abilities and if they want to use their abilities, so on their motivation. And here you see again, that's why basics of business is sometimes such a nice field. It's sometimes sheer, plain, simple logic about everyday life. You must have the abilities and you must want to use them. So we could not have seen that before, although better, we have already known that during our whole lives, but we couldn't have found it out or formulated on ourselves so nicely. So think about motivation or about yeah, the way or the extent in which a person is fit for a job. Then we will have to think about the selection of our staff. So does the person fit to the task? Do you give a task to somebody who is entirely unfit to do it, entirely dislikes it or so? You will have to take that into account. Then the working conditions play a role. If it's a very hot surrounding, if all the necessary working material is missing, if there is no air condition in summer, although the people need to think a bit, then your performance goes down. So you will have to know about that. Also, there is naturally an importance of social climate in the firm. So how your people behave concerning each other, that also plays a role. Payment is important for satisfaction and for motivation. If you underpay your people, that makes them reluctant to work. It might be if you overpay them, it might also have some negative consequences. And you might also think about additional social benefits which you grant in order to create a good atmosphere. So many things are of interest there. We can't talk about all of them. When you want to select employees, you will have to look for adequate persons and you must see that the persons fit the positions. You remember positions were a bundle of tasks which has to be fulfilled constantly and which is to be handed over to a certain person. Sometimes, at least in Germany, or might be in other countries too, there is a kind of inner enterprise democracy to a certain extent. For example, in Germany, there is a workers' council in German called the Betriebsrat, and they have the right to co-determination concerning several staff-related questions. For example, when you set up general guidelines for the selection of applicants and you are a big firm, they might have the right to get involved. Well, when you think about selecting the persons for your positions, for open positions in your firm, there are two basic ways you can take people, applicants from outside the firm or from inside. These two approaches are entirely different. No firm will probably rely only on one single way, but you should think and know about the advantages and disadvantages of the individual approaches here. For example, if you select people from within the firm, that gives people a strong motivation to perform well because they can hope for a promotion in the job. If you have chances to make a career in one firm, people will probably not change their firm so often as they do if they have no chance to get a better job within their own firm. It might be that if people work hard in your firm and for your firm, that they get frustrated if the better jobs go to people from outside who have never yet done anything positive for the firm. And another advantage from the perspective of the employer is the person to whom you give a certain position is a person who you already know. So you know about that person's social attitude, his or her willingness to work hard, and the personal and intellectual abilities. So you can avoid mistakes. For example, if you select an applicant who on paper is in very good form and later shows to be absolutely inadequate, then you have paid a huge amount of money for several months for a person before you find out, okay, that's not the person who's fit for the job, and now you have the problem how to part from with that person, so to get rid of that person. Disadvantages for the approach to look for your applicants within the firm is that certain qualifications probably do not exist in your own firm, so you will have to hire external staff there, and it might be that that's also a second disadvantage, that your own people have developed a kind of corporate identity or mental approach to the work which is unique to your firm and makes them blind for everything else. So that they stick to the approach, we have always done it this way, and they are not keen on innovation. So it might be that to bring in new ideas, you can only look outside. Might be good. If you have to select between several applicants, you must develop some criteria for the choice. So you will look to knowledge, you will look to the physical abilities, if they can perform, use their knowledge. Psychological abilities get more and more important. There are some people who are not able to tolerate stress, and more also social competence play a role. There are some people whom you cannot employ in a department because they end up quarreling with everybody. So you must try to find out under all these aspects if an applicant is fit for the job, fit for the surroundings in which you need him or her. So probably you have some applications in written form and then make a job interview with the interesting persons and try to find out which person probably fits best. What you definitively must know is that there are certain legal restrictions when it comes to the selection. In principle, you can naturally select the applicant which you regard as most fit for the job, and you should. Probably it also plays a role if you think you can work with somebody, so if you like that person or not. Sometimes two people meet each other directly, take an interest, dislike to each other, and probably you are not able to repair that anymore, so that's probably a warning signal. So probably you don't take these persons. But when it comes to things like that, there are some strong legal restrictions because certain discriminating criteria are forbidden. You are not allowed to discriminate people on the grounds of their sex and gender. So you can't say I only appoint or employ male applicants. Age discrimination is forbidden. Religious belief or disbelief is not a criterion for a job. Ethnic origins is forbidden. Sexual orientation. And important is, these criteria also are forbidden to be taken into account indirectly. So some 50 years ago, there were really, 50 or 60 years ago, there were really some very old-fashioned employers who said, I do not oppose employing women, but they could get pregnant and then I have to pay for them during maternity leave. And the answer is, well, to bring the argument, I'm not opposed to employing women, but only opposed to employing people who could get pregnant. That's naturally indirect discrimination based on sex, so forbidden. Now, naturally, if you choose your employees, probably nobody can look into your head, and so nobody can find out the real reasons why you select or reject an applicant. And for that reason, in order to make a legal control of anti-discrimination rules possible, there is a reversal of the burden of proof. If discrimination can be shown to be plausible in a case, then the employer is it who must prove that no discrimination took place. That is, by the way, one of the reasons why so many employment procedures have become very complicated, and why, for example, an employer usually doesn't risk to tell you the true motives or any motives for rejecting you. They all fear that a good lawyer could bring them to court, start a lawsuit, and claim financial damages because you did not get the job. Now, what's really important is that you know about what a discrimination is then, because that is the most decisive thing which you should never do when you decide about the employment of persons. Discrimination first requires that you treat persons differently, so from somebody else. So you need a comparison, a comparable situation. Naturally, the different treatment must be different to the treatment of another person who is in the same situation but does not share the forbidden criteria. Then, naturally, discrimination against a person, that's the only thing where you can complain about, not about being preferred. A discrimination against a person must be to that person's disadvantage. So, if you say somebody preferred me on unreasonable grounds, good luck. You cannot complain about that. But the person to whom you were preferred could probably complain if the selection was made on forbidden reasons. So, sex, age, gender, religion, and so on. And what is also inherent to the idea of a discrimination is that there is no legal justification for that behavior. A legal justification could be that there is a legal rule which makes an exception explicitly. So, for example, in general, in the European Union member states, it is forbidden to discriminate against an applicant on grounds of the nationality if that applicant has a passport from an EU state. Now there is an explicit limit or an explicit exception to that If you serve in government services, so if you become a civil servant, if you become what is called in German a Beamter, or if you work in a government position where you exercise state powers, then this can be restricted to own national. So if you intend to write a letter to the Spanish Parliament that you hereby apply to the position of a King of Spain or Queen of Spain, they can just throw your letter into a waste bin without ever taking your application into account, because that's a government position or position as head of state, and there is an explicit exception from the anti-discrimination rules. So Germany is not bound to regard or take into account the application of a French person as head of state of Germany. By the way, that's rather a step backwards in history, because, as you know probably from history, the greatest prime ministers of France under Louis XIV, Louis XIV in French, were Italians. The only prime minister of Louis XIV was Giulio Mazarini, Cardinal Mazarin. He was Italian. And Napoleon was from Corsica. That was also a kind of foreigner in France, and so on. But be it as it is, there are exceptions explicitly laid down in the law, and sometimes there are so-called implicit exceptions, so something which a legislator forgot to regulate, but things which are regarded as reasonable, tolerable situations or cases, and there courts usually have to decide what is justified and not. Okay, what one should also know of legal rules concerning employing people, that's that employment contracts, in Germany at least, may be made for an unlimited period of time or for a limited, restricted period of time only. You have the two alternatives. And now, surprise, mostly labor law requires that employment contracts are made for an unlimited period of time, and that if you want to dismiss somebody, you can do it, but you can only do it under certain circumstances. And in Germany, now another surprise. If there is no explicit agreement made in advance, then an employment contract is for an unlimited period of time, so you cannot easily get rid of somebody. What is allowed, if it has been agreed upon, is a probing period, a testing period, which nevertheless must be agreed upon explicitly and in written form. All these things, by the way, are one of the reasons why nowadays you will probably not get a job without having signed a written employment contract in advance. Otherwise, all experts in the personnel department would probably make a revolution and say that's legally far too fraught with risks. So they would probably refuse or warn your employer to employ you before there is a written contract, sometimes even legally demanded. Nevertheless, by the way, a contract, under civil law is valid if two people agree. So if you make an oral contract on employment and you can prove it, important, if you can prove that there was an employment contract, then you directly start with an employment contract which has the legal standard conditions which are relatively favorable for an employee. And that is, by the way, why it's not recommendable to start without a written contract, because then you can always debate the details if they are not fixed in written form. Yeah, naturally, the working conditions also determine if you perform well or not. The things which I spoke about first were the things which determine the way in which a certain person is fit for the job and how you can find and select these people. Now let's come to the working conditions. There has been a tendency, or there has been a sector of science called, one might call it work science or scientific management or so, that occupies itself with finding out which working conditions are the optimal ones for human beings when they want to work in a certain sector. So you want to design working conditions for optimal working environment with the idea that you can maximize the output. That's like profit motive. And naturally, but not a contradiction to that, that the working conditions are the most possible healthy ones for your employees. In the long run, by the way, that also pays for the enterprise, because when the health of your employees is ruined, then you have them sick and they can't work, can't produce, you will have to train new ones, and so being nice to your employees under the working conditions aspect is probably not a contradiction to maximizing your own profit. Good. Yeah, so there are scientific researchers who analyze what the best productivity conditions are. Scientific management developed shortly after 1900 in the US, occupied itself with that. They filmed people during work, tried to optimize the movements of people, and so on. Sometimes these analyses can be used to design standards for working. For example, if you want to pay people according to the number of items which they properly produce during a certain time, you must know how much an average worker with average qualification can produce, which performance you can expect, so that people get a decent salary which is attractive for them and also for you. And if you closely study what the people have to do, you also can form a better impression, that's number 3 here on the list, which work is highly demanding and difficult and which work is easy. And that is something which you should know if it comes to finding reasons for paying people highly or low. Very often you come down to such basic questions like, when is breakfast time best? Even on that, there has been scientific research in the field of Arbeitswissenschaft, so labor sciences or scientific management studies. Should it be a long break, short break? Are several short breaks better for the performance and health of employees than one long break? And so on. All that has been done research on. When are my workers best? So when are their best hours? And here was in Europe the result that the best productive hours are from 8 to 11 in the morning and from 6 to 21 in the evening. And big surprise, the one or other student will see that this is an explanation why some of us like working in the evening so much. Evidently, it's one of our best hours physiologically. And another big surprise, when it came out that from 8 to 11, these are the best hours in the morning, many people were surprised. Directly in the middle of that period of time, most people have their breakfast break or have a morning break. So they make a break at the moment when they need it least. So relatively surprising. Naturally, the results of such research also are mirrored by legislation sometimes. When it comes out that certain working conditions are highly dangerous and damaging to workers, they will probably be forbidden, or certain standards will be set by law as minimum standards. That is especially relevant because very often, if you have inconvenient working conditions, they cause a damage not immediately but in the long run after 5 or 10 years. And so very often it makes sense if there are legal standards. Especially in the meantime, most states have a maximum working time per day. They have rules against accidents at work, so safety standards and all that. That usually goes back on scientific reason. Yeah. When it comes to another determining factor, that's the working climate, then you must see that if you, for example, have a negative atmosphere between the workers or employees, that influences productivity negatively. For example, if all your workers spend most of their time thinking about how can I pay back the atrocities which yesterday Mr. Smith uttered against me, and how can I take revenge on Mrs. Miller? Then much of your time goes away on that and you work less. Well, then bullying, or being bullied better, is also one of the major sources of getting people sick in the long run. So it's naturally interesting to find out about determining factors for that and how an employer can prevent that and other things. Interestingly, bullying, which Germans know under the headline of mobbing, is usually happening if a group of people is under stress. You can even see that in a group of chimpanzees or gorillas in the zoo. When the group gets under stress, then they begin to bully the weakest in the group. And usually they know no stop. So it really escalates. That's something which one should know. Now, one warning for your real life. You should not wonder how you can find out if you are being bullied by others. Trust me, you will recognize that early enough. The interesting and really decisive thing which you should worry about is how can you find out that you are just at the moment or in the last weeks bullying somebody else, because that is what you don't find out without thinking about things. My personal idea is probably when you find out that you never agree and would never agree with what Mr. Smith wants or Mrs. Miller. So when you see that there is a certain tendency in you to criticize a certain person, whatever that person does, then it's highly recommendable to wake up and think, okay, perhaps I'm a bully now, and try to stop yourself, calm down, and probably might be that you are not really satisfied with your own situation at the moment, or that you should try to find a constructive social solution, so to make friends again with that person against whom you develop such negative feelings or negative attitude. Yeah. Under the aspect of working climate, it may pay off to offer the workers social services, additional payments or so, which they don't expect, so to be generous. Hmm? Very often we expect from workers to be generous with their time, with their performance, to do the more than they are obliged to, because sometimes the work doesn't follow the rules or the expectations. So some 10 or 15 minutes more before one can leave, that very often happens. And now if you educate your people that you insist on every small detail, so if you are really, really strict, then probably they will develop the same attitude. And so generosity may pay, flexibility. So if you are sometimes a bit generous, it might be that your people also are generous and don't count any minute and don't insist in following up any extra minute which they worked and having it paid off or compensated in free time on another day. Well, good. Last determining factor for the performance, payment, kind of payment. The most important thing is that you need reasons for the amount which you pay to people if you employ several people. Okay, accepted reasons for a high or low pay is the efforts which somebody has to bring physically and intellectually, and the output. So if somebody is really good, you can also give a premium for that. But if you form ideas on the reasons why you pay what, you will probably think about intellectual requirements, physical requirements, the efforts in psychological and physical dimensions, the responsibility, and the working conditions. Somebody working at a steel factory at the oven where it's extremely hot has a very challenging working conditions. People want to get some remuneration for that because that is hard work then, and naturally they want to get paid for this. Good. But one of the most important aspects is that human beings, or even all primates, so also chimpanzees and gorillas, so do not only care about what they get paid, but also if they can regard that as a just payment. So they compare with the wage of others, and if they see that's unfair, the relation in which they are paid with regard to others, then you will have enormous problems, because all primates have a very strong instinct to protest against unfair treatment. So if they think they are treated less favorably than somebody else in the group, which they perceive as being on the same level or on a lower level, then you really have war in the group. Then they are highly dissatisfied, and that is far more important for them, as if they could live or if they could be happy with their payment if they had an isolated view. So finding reasons which justify the differences or the equalities of payment is highly important if you want to have a stable working relationship and peace in your firm. So you need to develop the reasons for a wage in a plausible way so that you can give reasons and compare. Either you make a kind of an overall approach that you list, make a kind of sequence for the positions, and then group similar positions together in wage groups, that you say certain things from my perspective have comparable qualifications, requirements, and working conditions, and so that justifies to treat them equally. Or you make an analytical approach where you, for example, have a kind of a scorecard for every aspect, and add up the scores and find a sequence or a ranking for positions in such a way. Also, there are several forms of payment. For example, you can be paid according to the time which you spend in the firm. You can be paid according to the output which you produce, and you can get premiums if you do more than could be expected. And the important thing there is not the one and only best way to pay people. For example, if you pay people according to time, and there is a given amount of work, then might motivate them to work more slowly so that they get more payment. If you pay them according to items produced, it might be that they produce more items with a lower quality. If, for example, you pay a lawyer according to the lawsuits he has to deal with, and that lawyer will try to involve you in more and more lawsuits. That is not what you wanted. So a lawyer, if you employ him or her, will probably best be paid on time. And also there you can go much into details, and there is much interesting things to find out. When it comes to all that organizing work, relationships, working conditions, and so you should inform yourselves on your own about participation of workers in the enterprise. Sometimes they are offered to buy shares to establish a closer connection between them, or identification between them and the aims of the enterprise. And you should also inform yourselves about trade unions, what they are, how they represent the workers' rights, and how that all functions, because that also is an important legal aspect which you must know if you want to inform yourself about human resources. Now, the other aspect, the first thing I talked with you was all about, is a person able to do the job, and how do they pay them. Now a bit in general on motivation. People must not only be able to do the job, but they also must want to do what you require from them, and you must bring them to do that. So you must give them some positive motivation, an aim, or remuneration which they get and which they find attractive. People are not generous, so you don't motivate people by just saying, it would be nice for me. So you must know about what they really want in order to make a bargain. You get what you want, if I get what I want, so you must know about motivation. Some basic insights. One of the core equations or models how you can explain high or low motivation is an equation which says motivation behaves like the product of the reward multiplied with the probability of that reward. That means if you promise somebody a high reward, it's highly motivating. Now, on the other hand, if you don't see any chance to get that reward, motivating effect is very low. For example, if you study very, very well, you could win a Nobel Prize in economics. Now, this announcement will motivate none of you to study really profoundly. Why? Okay, there is nearly no chance. Okay, it's not excluded. It might happen. But none of us is going to regard this as really plausible or probable. Might happen by coincidence. If you are already a genius or turn into one. So the idea, study properly and you can win a Nobel Prize, will not motivate you. Reason, probability of the reward is extremely low. although the value of the result, imagine you could be a Nobel Prize winner, would be highly respected, money would flow in. So value of that result, high, probability, low, let's say 0. Product, 0. Motivation effect, 0. On the other hand, you can work for an hour and you get a wage of 100, and there's no doubt. Now 100 for an hour of work. Well, don't know when you look this, perhaps inflation made my example a bit uninteresting, but at least at the moment, 100 euro per hour, okay. There are lots of very good and high reward for an hour of time. And now, if there is a 100% probability, that's highly motivating. Yes, give me the job, even for me. Hey, let's do it. Any offers? We are going to accept them. So that explains in a certain way how motivation functions. If probability measured between 1 and 0 is low, let's say, if you expect that's not going to happen, 0 times any value of a reward gets a 0 effect. By the way, you can even understand from that formula why some criminals do not react to harder punishments in the law. If you make harder laws, that does not have any effect if you come across so-called gambler type. These people who just like the risk or don't see the probability that they could be caught. If you say, if you do something, death penalty, that should be the ultimate value of a punishment. So the negative motivation should be extreme. Now, on the other hand, if you have somebody who just has in mind, well, that's not going to happen, they will never catch me, I am a genius, it's so safe, nothing ever happened to me, and will never, so then they regard the probability of the punishment as 0. And so you can make the punishment announcements harder and harder. It will have no effect due to that equation. On the other hand, there was something really interesting. There has been a time in American City when they began to show a no tolerance policy against any even slight infringement of the law. So wrong parking was punished heavily and always. The result in the long run was murder amounts went down considerably. Evidently, here you see the motivation function working. People learned, if I do something wrong, punishment will follow. Then naturally, the negative reward announcement got a highly motivating effect, because now the probability of getting caught was regarded by the people as different from 0. They made the experience, or their neighbors made the experience, okay, you can't afford to violate the law, punishment will follow, and then you can even say a very small punishment can already have a deterrent effect. Now, that is something where you again can understand that sometimes basics of business gives you some insight into the rest of the world. Okay, now we can, under a terminological aspect, distinguish between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. The intrinsic is the remuneration lies in the act itself. So it's not a monetary one. It is a remuneration which comes from the task which you perform itself. For example, if you write a book and you like writing the book, and when it will be finished, you will really be proud of having done that. Intrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivation has nothing to do with the matter as such, but is just connected by others to the result of the action. For example, if you do some things well, then you get paid. Or your parents see that's motivate the child a bit to learn hard for the exams, or better than learning hard is learning good, learning well. So parents say, we buy you a new computer or we buy you a car if you have excellent grades. That would be an external motivation, because then the satisfaction, or the thing which you aim at, is not the thing itself, not the learning, not the knowledge, but then it's the external reward which you get from your parents. In sometimes, naturally, the best way is to combine both ways of remunerations, because imagine you take up a job just because of intrinsic motivation, but you don't get any extrinsic motivation, so no money. Then you can, due to reality, only cancel that job after a while and look for a less interesting job where at least you get paid decently. And intrinsic motivation and extrinsic can meet. Imagine there is a lorry driver, a truck driver, you want to motivate him or her to transport goods to Munich until 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's nearly impossible, but you promise to that person a premium of some €1,000 by, if that can be accomplished in time. So extrinsic motivation would be €5,000, that's big money, and the intrinsic motivation would be, I want to be that truck driver who managed to do the impossible. I will be at Munich at 6 o'clock, even if nobody regards that as possible. That makes me proud. By the way, if you talk to people and want to give them to direct their attention to possible internal or intrinsic motivation, then you should really at least believe in that. We all know these bosses who talk about how fine it would be if somebody could do this, and how great this were if, and then you see, okay, nobody is going to believe that. How we managed to write all our letters now, that should make us proud. Why should it? So if you talk about intrinsic motivation, that should be believable. And probably you must know something about the person you talk about, because there might be people who might be proud of certain things which others regard as normal standard. So, well, and motivation also has been under scientific research for a long time. There have been some very tricky things which came. For example, one of the hindrances, the obstacles to do research into motivation was when the people know that you do research into motivation. That was a so-called Hawthorne effect. There were the Hawthorne Factories where the workers took part in scientific research and they knew it. The idea was we change the working conditions from time to time, and then we observe if there is a better output or lower output than before. And something very strange happened. Every time when the working conditions were changed, the workers got better. And after a while, the experimentators came to the suspicion that probably these people got better and better, completely without any connection to working conditions. And then they found out the natural explanation. These people had the idea that they were taking part in an important scientific experiment which could make the lives of many people better. And so their motivation was to do their very, very best always. And that was why they grew better and better. So what motivated them was not the working conditions, but the knowledge that they were important at the moment and that the research at the moment was important, so everybody wanted to give his or her very best. So sometimes things can really backfire. There will be effects where you didn't think of. As always, when you do science, statistics, so it's always a question of interpretation, and sometimes it takes a long, long time to find out the evident things. Afterwards, they are evident. Before, probably never. Yeah, and one other thing which is really important to understand how motivation works. One of the most important theoretical insights how motivation works is detected by somebody called Maslow, and that's the hierarchy of human needs. Mr. Maslow established that theory, and his core argument is that human beings never feel all their needs, all the things which they want. There is a pyramid of human needs which begins at the bottom, and then you slowly develop upstairs. So your basic needs are physiological needs. You want to eat, to drink, you want shelter from the weather and other very elementary things. And as long as you are busy with caring for these needs, you will not feel the higher needs. And if you don't feel a need, it cannot motivate you to do something against that. So as long as you are sleeping under a bridge and have nothing to eat and drink, nobody can motivate you with social esteem and social recognition and standard. No. You don't feel any need for that. That's not your problem. And things which are not your problem are not your solution. That will not move you to do things. So you will react to the promise of food, drink, and housing. By the way, because sometimes people don't get that, money is an excellent means to motivate people there, because money is the average means or everywhere possible means to get what you need if you want food, drink, and housing. So somebody who is really sleeping under a bridge can probably, or who lives in very poor circumstances, can highly be motivated by money. Or for somebody who has not enough to eat or who can't pay the rent, a better job where 500 extra euro are in. That person will change. Now, the next step, when you have enough money to cover all your basic needs, then you will worry about the future. At the moment, everything is fine. What is about tomorrow? So you will strive for security. So then people can be motivated by, you have now this excellent job, you can trust, you can keep it. One will think about your pension, retirement age. So people will make promises to that. At the moment, increasing your salary by 1,000 euro per month probably does no longer motivate you. But, for example, an additional promise of 800 euro per month during your retirement age, It can be highly motivating because perhaps you expect at the moment to have 1500 for life when you are retired, and if somebody says, no, if you stay in my firm, then it will be 800 more every year, every day, no, every month if you're retired. Yeah? That is a highly motivating and very comfortable idea. Okay, when security is done, then social needs come up. Contacts, nice job, and so on. How is the working atmosphere and all that plays a role. Then recognition, rank, social standing, all that begins to play a role. And in the end, you just want to follow your own aims and to realize all your possibilities. So that's called self-actualization. And indeed, if you are here on top if you are well accepted in society, everybody looks up to you, and in the end, you probably just decide on your own what you want to do or not, and you just follow your own interests. By the way, that is a faith which not everybody shares. Most people are on a lower scale. Now, if you see that, Maslow's idea is now, when you are still on the level that you want security, one can motivate you with offers addressing or promising security concerning food, housing, and so on. People will not motivate you with interesting things to do, Nobel Prize chances, and so on. That's not for you the decisive aspect. On the other hand, when everything is there, then it's very often not possible to motivate you with more money. People at the top, usually when they look for a job, it would be strange if somebody there really regards it as a decisive aspect if the one job pays 300,000 a year and the other job pays 320,000 a year, and probably begin to look for other things to select. Good. Here we have a small overview which category of needs belongs to which step in the hierarchy. But again, core aspect is you only feel the needs on the level on which you are at the moment. So you will never react to promises which are below or higher. And that now explains why different people react absolutely differently to promises, rewards. You can even see that in the course, in the development of over time of a society. After World War II, in Germany everything was in ruins. There you strongly reacted to money. I know that from the history of my own family. Somebody told me, a family member of the previous generation was paid 150 German marks after World War II in the first job and directly hopped over to another job when there was a better salary. In the 1960s, many people in Germany, or many firms in Germany, started to give promises: when you are retired, you will get a pension, because then the people had a certain amount of wealth which they never dreamed of before. And now, naturally, the current wealth was enough, and so they began to develop a need for security. They wanted to have the safety that it is not going down in the future. Social needs come later. For example, your generation usually has not started under very poor conditions. So probably you are directly interested in other kind of jobs. which are more interesting, where you have more contacts, which pleases you more, and so on. Well, not always sheer money motivates you. Good. And that is something which you also have to keep in mind. Now, if you offer 1,000 euro as a reward to a millionaire, there will be no reaction. If you offer 1,000 euro to a student who has, let's say, 100 euro for free spending in a month after having covered the basic needs, there will be a strong reaction. All that's plain and simple. And naturally, if a country gets more and more wealthy, you will have to develop different ways of motivation. For example, some 200 or 150 years ago, when all people were poor or proletarians, had nearly enough to live from, then, for example, doing research and explaining them, if you behave a little bit differently, then you can produce 10 items more a day, and that brings 10 euro, or no, not euro at the time, $10 more. They would be enormously grateful. And now imagine the same, you go into a farm somewhere today and tell the people, if you don't do this twice, but only once, if you move your hand a bit differently, then you can be quicker by several minutes a day, and so you produce some items more, 3 or 2. Then you probably get a very drastic and not very polite reaction, which shows you that the people do not really care about that. Different situation, different reaction. That's something which you know. Okay, so your Maslow can very often explain many interesting things to you. You can see that very often somewhere else. And I want to bring back again this to you: probability for a reward times or multiplied the value of the reward. That's explaining your reaction. If you see, for example, before an exam, I have no chance, and you will not learn. Even if you could get a highly renowned, respected bachelor degree, no reaction. So you need to support your self-esteem a bit, your idea that you can do it, and you are better motivated. And so that very often explains. Yeah, that was enough for that chapter, I think. And as you see from the black screen here, indeed it was enough. So let's stop here. I thank you for listening if you listened. I thank you for not falling asleep if you did not fall asleep. If you fell asleep, please don't get shocked when the sound goes away after a minute, or when some other YouTube video from somebody completely different begins afterwards. Yeah, it was nice to talk to you. Recover well till we see each other for the next time, and that shall be enough for now.